This video will show you how to do grouping in a dashboard. One basic way to do grouping in a dashboard is to use a crosstab. A crosstab is also called a pivot table. To create a crosstab to group data in a dashboard, drag a crosstab component from the toolbox into the dashboard. Click the Edit button in the middle of the crosstab or at the top right, and then specify the fields, usually dimensions, to be used as row and column headers, and the fields, usually measures, to be used as the aggregates. In this example, we'll use category as the row dimension, and we'll use date as the column dimension. For each category and date, in this case each year group, we'll aggregate the total field. This is a basic crosstab. For each combination of year and category, we have the aggregated, in this case, summed total. There are a number of different properties that you can set for dimensions and measures. For example, to set dimension properties, press the Edit Dimension button next to either of the dimensions. This allows you to specify a ranking. For example, if we only wanted to see the top 3 categories according to sum total, we could select a ranking such as this. Or if we wanted to sort the categories in a particular order, perhaps in descending order according to the aggregated measure. You can also set properties of measures. To do this, press the Edit Measure button next to any measure that you have in the crosstab editor, and then choose the aggregation method or choose the % representation. One common change that you would make for a date dimension is the level of grouping for the dates. To do this, for the date dimension in the column region, press the Edit Dimension button, and then find the level property. This allows you to set the grouping level for the date. For example, we might consider representing the dates grouped by quarter. Press the Apply button to change the date grouping level. Another common thing that you may want to do is to combine individual groups into a larger, more inclusive group. For example, you may want to combine 2 of the categories into a larger category. For example, let's say that we wanted games and graphics to be unified into a single group. To do this, Control-click on the graphics category and then Control-click on the games category. This selects both categories. Then right-click on one of those categories and select Group. Provide a group name for the new category. We might choose to call it Games and Graphics, and press OK. This combines the 2 categories into a new category called Games and Graphics. The totals for the 2 original categories are combined together as expected. Let's remove the grouping. To do that, right-click and select Ungroup. This restores the original grouping. In many cases, you may want to have a hierarchical grouping. For example, in this crosstab, we may want to have both category and product name arranged in a hierarchical manner. There are 2 approaches to doing this. One way would be to simply add the product name field into the row region here next to category. This would create a hierarchical structure in the crosstab. Let's do that first. Find the name field, drag it into the rows region in the crosstab editor, and this will introduce a new row header column so that we now have both a grouping by category, and within each category we have a grouping by product name. The totals that we now see in the crosstab are the totals for each subgroup of product name and quarter. In some cases, though, you may not want to introduce this new set of row headers. Instead, you may want to merely make the hierarchy available to the user so that the user can drill down into the hierarchy if desired. To do that, you can instead set up a hierarchy for the crosstab. Let's remove the name field here. Then press Finish Editing to save the crosstab as it is here, with simply Category as the row header. Now what we can do is we can set up a hierarchy that will allow the user to drill from the category level to the product name level. To do this, right-click on the crosstab, select Properties to open the crosstab Properties dialog box, and then select the Hierarchy tab. Drag the columns that you want to make up the hierarchy. Here, we'll drag the Category field to the right panel, and then immediately below the Category field, we'll drag the Name field. This specifies that we want a hierarchy that goes from Category at the outer level to Name as the inner level. Press OK, and then note when you mouse over the Category field as the row header, there will be a drill down button that the user can click to expand the category into its constituent products. Any category can now be expanded in this manner, and the totals then displayed will be the totals corresponding to each constituent product in that category. When the category is collapsed, the totals then correspond to the category as a whole. Let's return to that hierarchy specification. Again, right-click on the crosstab and select Properties. Note that date fields are inherently hierarchical, and a hierarchy drill down is provided by default for date headers. However, you can adjust that hierarchy by adding the date field explicitly into the hierarchy here. For example, you might drag in the date field and set the top level of the date hierarchy as year, and then drag the date field again and set the next level of the hierarchy as quarter of year or month of year, and so on. Now let's look at grouping in a chart. Much of what we'll see now is also covered in the video on how to create a chart. Let's add a chart component. Open the chart editor. And create a simple chart. We'll place category on the x-axis and total on the y-axis. Press Finish Editing to close the chart editor. Note that even in this very simple chart we do have grouping. In fact, we've grouped by category. For each category group, we're displaying the aggregated total for that category. Let's add some additional grouping to this chart. Press the Edit button in the top right corner, and let's add some grouping on the date field. We can try using color to do that. Drag the date field to the color region in the chart editor. We now have the data grouped also by year. Of course, we can change the grouping level. To do this, press the Edit Dimension button next to the color field, and select the desired level from the level menu. We might consider changing to the quarter level. Press the Apply button to see the result. Let's change back to year. We can use one of these other visual bindings in the bottom left panel to represent the date grouping as well. For example, shape, size, or text. We can also use multiple representations. For example, we can display the year grouping as text and additionally as color. The tooltip displays the values for each group. Move the mouse over the chart to display the tooltip. You can change the aggregation method for data in a group by pressing the Edit Measure button next to your measure. For example, we could change from sum to average to change the way that the values in the group are aggregated. You could also consider representing values for example by using % of grand total or one of the other trend and comparison operators. The chart now displays the values as % of grand total. Let's change the chart to display the groups as the % of each category. To do this, select the Custom operator at the bottom of the menu, press Edit, and from the Calculation dialog box choose % of category. Press OK, and then press Apply to change the chart representation. Each year group is now represented as the % of the category. The years in each category, of course, add up to 100%. In some cases, as we saw for the crosstab table, you may want to make larger group units by combining dimension values. For example, we might consider combining games and graphics into a single group. Just as we did for the crosstab, you can select the groups that you want to combine by control-clicking, then right-click, and select Group Items. Enter a name for the group, for example, Games and Graphics, and press OK to create the new larger group. To remove a user-defined group, right-click on the group and select Ungroup Items. Just as we saw for a crosstab table, for a chart you can also introduce hierarchy in the dimension. For example, we might consider allowing a user to drill from the category level to the product name level. To do this, let's close the chart editor, press Finish Editing, then right-click on the chart and select Properties. Select the Hierarchy tab and define the desired hierarchy just like we did in the crosstab. Category as the outer level, name as the inner level of the hierarchy. Press OK, and then note that on the x-axis the category dimension provides a drill down button. Press the drill down button to drill to the product name level. To drill back up to the category level, find the Drill Up button and press the button to change levels. Note that grouping can also be dynamic. Both the chart editor and crosstab editor are available by default to end users. So for example, if we save this dashboard and view it in the user portal, the chart will provide an edit button for end users to open the chart editor. This is the very same chart editor that you used as a designer to create the chart. So just as you were able to adjust the grouping for the chart by adding a dimension into the X or Y region or into one of the visual bindings, an end user can also add a dimension into one of these regions of the chart editor to create new groupings or adjust existing groupings, for example, by changing the date grouping level. The changes that a user makes to the dashboard will be saved for that user in any bookmarks that they choose to save. Let's return to Visual Composer. If you do not want end users to be able to modify charts by changing groupings or adding groupings to the chart, or a crosstab, you can turn off the ad hoc editing feature. To do this, right-click on the chart, select Properties, select the Advanced tab, and then uncheck the Enable Ad Hoc Editing property. This is the property that allows the end user to open up the chart editor or crosstab editor for a crosstab. If you do choose to disable the end user chart editing or crosstab editing, you can still make grouping dynamic by providing form elements to the user that will allow them to change the groupings on a chart or a crosstab. For example, let's say that you wanted end users to be able to choose the dimension that's displayed on the x-axis of this chart. They might choose between category, as we have here, or state or company to provide the grouping on the x-axis of the chart. To do this, let's add a combo box. We'll make the chart slightly smaller. And then from the form element group, find a combo box component and drag it into the dashboard. Since in this case we want the combo box to be populated with the names of particular fields, category, state, or company, the easiest way to do this is simply to drag the fields from the data source into the combo box. Category, state, and company. You can of course also enter these values manually. To see how you would do that, right-click on the combo box and select Properties. Note that in the List Values section, the Embedded option here is checked, and to edit the embedded values that are displayed in the combo box, press the Edit button. Here you can change the labels or the values, and you can add additional labels and values. The labels are almost always arbitrary, that is, you can enter whatever labels you want, but in this case the values have to match legitimate field names. So with these labels and values, let's go ahead and close the dialog box, and then let's give a meaningful name to this combo box. Instead of combo box 1, let's call it X dimension. Then press OK. A user can now select one of these 3 dimensions from the combo box. However, we have not yet connected the combo box to the chart, so making a selection here has no effect yet. Open the chart editor by pressing the Edit button on the chart, and let's configure the chart to use the combo box to set the field on the x-axis. Instead of having the category always on the x-axis, press the Value Type button next to the category field, and then select Variable. From the provided menu, select the X dimension combo box. This menu will list any form elements that are currently in the dashboard, which at the moment is just the one combo box we called X dimension. Press Finish Editing to close the chart editor. Note that you can now select Company, Category, or State to provide the X-axis grouping. Let's go a little bit further and also provide some control to the user for changing the measure displayed on the Y-axis. Rather than having this be limited to just sum total, let's also allow them to select quantity purchased and to choose between sum and average as the aggregation methods. The procedure here is the same. Again, we could add a combo box to provide the user this control, or in this case, let's use a radio button. Drag a radio button component into the dashboard. The first one will provide the choice of measure, total or quantity purchased, and we can add these values the same way that we did for the combo box by simply dragging them into the radio button. Total and quantity purchased. Let's add another radio button that will allow the user to select between average and sum. In this case, we'll need to manually enter the values to be displayed in the radio button. So right-click on the radio button, select Properties, select the Embedded option in the List Values area, and press Edit. The choices that will give the user are average and sum. Here again, the labels are arbitrary, but the values need to match actual aggregation methods, and there are actual aggregation methods called average and sum. If you look in the aggregate menu for a chart or a crosstab, you will find these methods listed there. So these are valid values to use for the radio button. Press OK, and let's give the radio button a name. In this case, we'll call it Aggregation Method. Let's do the same for the other radio button. Right-click, select Properties, and we'll call this one Y Measure. We now have all of our controls, we just need to hook them up so that they modify the chart as we intend. Open the chart editor by pressing the Edit button, and instead of having sum total as the fixed field on the y-axis, we'll change this to use a variable. In particular, the radio button we called y-measure. The measure displayed on the y-axis will now be set by that radio button. For the aggregation method, press the Edit Measure button next to the measure on the y-axis, and instead of having this be a fixed aggregation method of sum, press the Value Type button on the right side, select Variable, and then from the menu, select Aggregation Method. That's the name of the radio button from which the user will select either sum or average. Press Apply. Now both the measure and the aggregation method for the measure on the y-axis will be controlled by the user. Because the chart is beginning to look a bit busy with the text labels on the bars, let's remove the date field from the text area. Then press Finish Editing to close the chart editor. Test the form elements to make sure that they all work. The user can select Quantity Purchased, as we see now, or Total on the y-axis. The user can also select to use either an aggregation method of average or sum. And as we saw earlier, the user can select one of 3 dimensions for the x-axis. One thing we may want to change now is that instead of representing the values as % of category, since we have other dimensions that might be used on the x-axis, we should probably display the raw values instead. Let's reopen the chart editor, press the Edit Measure button next to the measure on the Y field, and for trend and comparison, set this to none. Press Apply and press Finish Editing. You can add any titles that you want for these form components. For the radio buttons, you can double-click on a title to modify it. Or you can remove the title entirely from the Properties dialog box and then simply add text above the component, as we'll do for the combo box. You can make grouping in a crosstab dynamic in the same way. Let's quickly see how you would do this. We'll add a crosstab below the chart. And let's use the crosstab editor to set up a dynamic crosstab that uses these form components to control the grouping. Press the Edit button for the crosstab. For the row header, we can add category. For the column header, we can add date. And for the aggregate, we can initially add total. Right now, this is simply a static crosstab. What we want to do is we want to make the row header and the aggregate dynamic. So press the Value Type button next to the category header and select Variable. From the menu, select X dimension. Then press the Value Type button next to the total measure in the aggregates region and select Variable there. From the menu, select Y measure. Finally, press the Edit Measure button in the aggregates area next to the measure and press the Value Type button next to the aggregate. Select Variable and choose Aggregation Method. Then press the Apply button. We have now made this crosstab dynamic in the same way that we did previously for the chart. Press Finish Editing to test the controls on the dashboard. A user can now select different dimensions to display as the row header, category, company, or state, different measures to display as the aggregate, total, or quantity purchased, and different methods of aggregation, either average or sum. As you can see, the procedure is the same for both the chart and the crosstab.